Hi, my name is Roberto. I see most of us are from SPS. We have just a few guests, but I will introduce myself anyway. I'm an associate professor in spatial planning and strategy, and I specialize in governance. And I'm especially interested in governance of sustainability and in a notion that a few people call spatial justice. So I'm really interested in the implications of justice for planning as a guiding concept. Carola, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Carola Hein in the Chair History of Architecture and Urban Planning in the Faculty of Architecture. Maybe to summarize what I stand for, I'm interested in understanding and looking at the past to better understand the present and then to design the future. So there's a clear link, a reason to do history and associate it with what we are doing. And the other fascination that I have is about commodity flows and the way they shape the built environment. And that's where port cities come in and the global landscapes of oil. And it has been a pleasure. And so that comes all together in our research around the Union for the Mediterranean.
Martin, I think you need to allow me to share my screen, if you don't mind.
It's done?
Yes, done. Okay, guys, this is always an adventure to see if this works. Let's see how this is gonna go. Can you see the full screen? Or can you see two slides?
We see the right thing.
Okay, cool. All right, so I'll try to be more or less brief. Sorry, Meng, I'll deal with the link a little bit later. I thought it worked. So what we are going to do today is to discuss this strategic urban development action plan prepared by myself, Carola, and Remon for the Union for the Mediterranean. And I'm going to try to keep it under 30 minutes. I hope I can. I am going to try to tell you where it comes from. Where does this come from? How was it made? Which I think is quite important. And what is it? And what are the many limitations that such a policy framework has in reality? And in doing so, Carola and Remon, if it comes, will join me and add to my very forgetful mind. So I tend to forget stuff. So where does it come from? That's a very interesting story, which I know that Andreas is very familiar with, but it comes from something called the Barcelona process and the Barcelona Declaration of 1995, which is a long-standing project for Mediterranean integration. So all very good, right? We know that Europe has a neighborhood policy. It really pays attention to its neighbors, not only because of its goodwill, but it's because it seeks most of all stability. So stability is, I think, a not so hidden objective of the European Union. Of course, it wants to achieve that through human development and strengthening of democracies. We know that's a little bit complicated, and integration. And by integration, they mean mainly economic integration. If we look at how the long story of this Barcelona integration, of the Barcelona process, we will see that France has played a key role. And in the beginning, Sarkozy wanted a kind of parallel European Union to be. He wanted to have a union, a Mediterranean Union, and that was one of his like key policies. But Germany and Turkey were absolutely against this idea. Spain and Italy were more or less on board with that, but Germany, their argument was, why do we need another union running in parallel? And Turkey at that time had hopes of joining the European Union and thought, okay, if we join the Mediterranean Union, this is never going to happen, right? Well, so he was convinced to shift this into a kind of a union for the Mediterranean, which I think translates the idea that it's the European Union working with its southern neighbors. A lot of it has to do with France propelling it. And it's very funny to see how France is still very, very vocal about what happens in the Mediterranean. You know that France has very deep links with Algeria, with Tunisia and Morocco specifically. So they are really interested. But Andreas, I'll keep in mind what you said the other day. It's a little bit of a toothless organization in the sense that they can only really advise and promote, bring together. They do have a big budget. They promote lots of meetings. They bring stakeholders and governments together, and I think there is a value to that. So who was involved in this action plan, and how did we get there? How did we get there? So UFM, obviously, DG Regio, the Directorate of Regio of the European Commission, the country's planning ministry, so all the ministries that have some planning responsibilities are very involved. UNESCO was very involved in this. And then you have all the other common suspects, right? European Investment Bank, OECD, UNDP, a number of other directorate generals of the European Commission, NGOs, quite vocal. They are very vocal, I have to say, sometimes a little bit too much. Euro-Mediterranean Assembly, European Committee of the Regions, Mediterranean local authorities, and the universities. So universities in the region are now gathering around this network called Agora. So what do these people actually do, right? And us, obviously. What do these people actually do? We have been in this process for 2 years. Of course, it is pre-pandemic. So in the beginning, we generally went to Brussels, presented, discussed, corrected, all kinds of different kinds of stakeholders, different kinds of meetings, different kinds of inputs we got. The inputs from the universities are very different from the inputs from NGOs, etc. We were actually, so how did we get there? We were actually invited by UFM directly. There was no tender. We were invited directly. I had to go to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands. I made a presentation and they said, yes, go ahead. They then financed us. So this is all financed by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. By us, I mean, of course, me, Carola, and Remon. We are the three of us involved in different aspects of this. Yeah. So, of course, we have looked at all these in order to draft this action plan. What did we have to do? We had to look at the urban agenda for the Mediterranean, which was already there. We didn't have anything to do with it. And we had to make it in a way that everything that was in the urban agenda for the Mediterranean would be translated into actions that people could actually take. We were befuddled in the beginning because we didn't, I think I speak for the three of us when I say we didn't really know what an action plan it was. And we had to find out and to kind of invent and say, well, we think this is what an action plan looks like. And I'm going to explain it later on. But in order to do that, we had to look at the urban agenda for the Mediterranean, all these other frameworks, SDGs, New Urban Agenda, Pact of Amsterdam, New Leipzig Charter, of which we took part in the drafting process. We were part of the New Leipzig Charter by participating in meetings and giving written feedback to them, etc. Right? So lots of frameworks. In total, we had 45 main international policy frameworks that we had to look at, understand, and follow, and a total of 125 policy frameworks and references that we used for the action plan. So from that, we got 3 very clear guidelines from the European Union, from the European Commission. They said, well, it needs to be science-led and evidence-based, so no grandstanding, no. It's all about science and good planning. Multi-sector and integrative, so we had to bring sectors together, and it should be especially concerned with participatory planning and inclusive of vulnerable silent voices. This comes from the European Commission. I know some students are here listening, and this is a message that I try to give to students as well. So if we do policy, if we do design, let's try to follow these 3
and
things.
Roberto.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was not only a kind of advice or a kind of recommendation that we were given, but it was, I think, a very clear message to all the participants, all the planning authorities from all the Mediterranean region, that they also should take into account whenever they would be sponsored, for example, for a project, that they should meet really these criteria. Yeah.
So what's the teeth then here, to reference a little bit what Andrea said, is that countries apply for funds, and they have been meeting with a lot of funding authorities from the European Union and elsewhere, World Bank, etc. And they have to kind of prove that they are following this in order to get the money. And so this is kind of a step, I think. And we had to formulate the criteria actually for that. So I'm not going to spend so much time on this. These are the principles that we followed to do this. This is a little bit what I have explained, but I want to concentrate on the fact that things need to be strategic and integrative. Why is that? Yeah, I should have another slide here, because what I want to say really is that most authorities in the Southern Mediterranean, but also in the Mediterranean as a whole, plan by projects, right? We know that that's very common around the world. We do projects, and the projects are not part of any strategy. So it's kind of you know, they are vanity projects many times. They are not based on real needs many times. They are poorly designed. That's a thing that we can say very clearly. And in order to enhance the strategic and integrative value of these projects, we have the action plan. So among the principles that we used is a principle that is being advanced by this guy called Meuleman, Louis Meuleman. He's a Belgian, I think, a professor, and he's talking about meta-governance for sustainability. And we used a lot of his concepts to think about what we were doing, and to think about how this has a territorial meta-governance for sustainability. For me, at least, is really connected to the notion of the territory, and to the notion that we have to do spatial planning to coordinate actions in the territory, right? This is an explanation. So in some slides, I'm going to go very fast. This is an explanation of what he means by meta-governance. So it's the governance of different kinds of governance: hierarchic governance, network governance, and market governance. and we have landed this into a kind of territorial governance that tries to balance all this. Very, you're going to tell me, it's very ambitious as an idea. Does it work in practice? I don't know. I think we did our best. I think it's kind of there, this, and I think if the action plan is followed, there is this coordination possible. I really believe that. So we want to increase performance of coordinated and integrated spatial development strategies to achieve sustainable development. It's not a blueprint, but a governance framework. And I preach what I do what I preach to the students, because I'm always talking about shaping the attention of stakeholders. And that's what we try to do here, in particular the public sector. So if I have to say to whom this action plan is addressed, it is the public sector. Why? Because we cannot coordinate all the millions of stakeholders involved in actions concerning planning in each country. That's impossible. So what we could do is to give a kind of a framework for the national governments to do that. So that's what they should do. We propose a set of simple but integrated, coordinated actions that are very actually simple to take, but they have, this is my slide saying that instead of governing by projects, you should govern by integrated vision making, strategy, and projects. We want to advance mutual comprehensibility and mutual learning from all these stakeholders we are talking about. So there is a part of the action plan that is only about education and capacity building, capacity strengthening. I have to tell you one thing, the language of diplomacy is incredible. We cannot talk about diplomacy, we cannot talk about capacity building, because that implies that some countries don't have capacity. We have to always talk about capacity strengthening. And this kind of language needs to be in the whole document. So the whole document is written in a language that is not the language that we would use mostly. It's really diplomatic language. And we hope and think that there is going to be a lot of institutional learning by socialization and emulation of policy and practice. This is facilitated by the adoption of common definitions alongside local definitions. So that's another thing. We cannot get rid of local definitions for sure, but we can draw the attention to common definitions, collection of comparable data, common efforts in capacity building and education, and formulation of comparable policy frameworks, the national urban plans. So some countries have national urban plans, or the others don't. Also in Europe, it's like that. And integrated city development strategies. I hope it's clear so far. I'm getting closer to the end here, where I just want to present you with the actions, and then I will give the word to Carola and to Remon. So the first action is to coordinate and enhance cohesion, and that's through a number of common frameworks and ways of doing it. It's basically about national urban plans. Basically about that. So how to formulate a national urban plan, where can you look for examples, what are the steps to formulate those plans? The second one is to educate and strengthen capacity, and that's what I was mentioning to you. The whole thing is conceived as a way for people to learn some common definitions and ways of doing things. I just want to in view, I will talk about that a little bit later. To envision and govern together, it's number 3. It's about participatory planning, communicative planning, citizen engagement, and co-design, and all these things that we know, we believe, I think all of us at TU Delft are the way to go, really. To connect and protect, that's something that comes from the need to integrate the region at a more infrastructural level. So we saw what's happening at the Suez Canal and how it affects the whole world. We have a number of infrastructures in the region that are key for the region and for the world, but for the region is heating up faster than the rest of the world. So this is related to that, and also to climate change. So climate change is very, very much present. To implement and manage, this is about project implementation and management, and the last one is to monitor and communicate. How do you communicate to the public, to the citizens, and how do you monitor it? And here is the little teeth that I was talking about. People need, projects need to kind of be approved, or they have a stamp from UFM, and then they have access to more funds. Remon, would you like to talk about the educate and strengthen capacity thing? What were your impressions of the process? And
yeah, of course I can, Roberto. Yeah, we were thinking that Roberto did not explain yet. You see, of course, the actions have numbers, but to actually, we were not thinking that one should be done before 2 or is conditioned to number 2. So it's actions that can be done in parallel and together are much more than the separate ones, of course. To educate and strengthen capacity, I think is on different levels. Of course, we are always thinking as a university about the young professionals of the future. So that for sure is a group that we have in our mind, and we would like to reach them via different ways. Of course, online education, massive open online courses, but we're also thinking about young professionals in practice to reach them online via a professional education online. But ideally always followed up also by something very pragmatic, practical in their context, in their settings, via on-site workshops and so on. So this is how we see how we can reach young professionals to be. I think it also relates to the Agora network that Roberto was referring to strengthen the relations between universities in the region, which was warmly welcomed our action plan when we presented this to them, because they saw really an opportunity to do good for themselves, but I suppose also for the Mediterranean region, and to get more knowledge and understanding, and to get connections to other institutes, and to for example TU Delft as well, to us.
And I think what we love to tell our colleagues at TU Delft is that we think that there will be opportunities for us to work together to give courses. Or I just want to, before I give the word to Carola to finish, I just want to say, well, action 5, implement and manage, is subdivided into thematic areas. We call them axes of intervention. That's the name we found. And these axes of intervention are thematic. They are integrative, we think. They should be integrative, but they are more concerned about something. And here we have already developed another, the integrated sustainable housing. I could explain, but it would be another presentation. And we are now, Carola is now busy with preparing the port area, port cities and their hinterlands thematic group, blue-green systems regeneration, heritage and tourism, informal settlements and the private hoods. We can talk about the special character of informal settlements in the Mediterranean, which is very different from Latin America, and brownfields and former railway sites, and large-scale infrastructure, mobility, and nodes. Carola, would you like to talk? Oh, public and shared spaces regeneration, yes. New towns and urban extensions. As you know, Egypt has these, not only Egypt, lots of countries there have urban extensions and new towns popping up, and they are utterly unsustainable. Carola, would you like to talk about the...
Yeah, I can pick it up there. I can also just add a few thoughts of what you've been talking about, and at the meantime, start even responding to some questions. Will asked in the chat if it's about sustainable development, sustainable urban development, territorial development, and spatial planning. And I think over the time period, what we experienced is that it's not purely about spatial planning, even though that's where it really started. And when you're working with diverse partners, including UNESCO, where the focus is on obviously on heritage, you kind of have to find a means of bringing these elements together. And while we all agree that we need more spatial planning, we also have to take housing from anything from the architectural to the urban design side along while doing planning. We have to take heritage along, thinking about protection as much as reuse and redevelopment. So I think it has become broader and probably more with a focus on sustainable development. Mm-hmm. And to take that as an, and what we've been trying to do too is to bring in other concepts. So if I take this to the wheel we imagined the circle. It's about having an agile methodology, because even when we collected the different projects, it is very clear that everyone is at a different state. And so you don't want to frustrate some. So all these projects came from different areas of the circle. Mm-hmm. And everybody needs something different. But yet we had three, I think, guidelines. One was to look into long-term development, so to tie the future into the past, what I said in the beginning, to look at multiple scales. So if a project was submitted as a park redevelopment, to also think it in the larger context of the city, for example, and to ideally create partnerships across borders. So that if you want to do whatever, a waterfront redevelopment, that you think it in time, in space, and with partners, so that you compare what's happening in Skikda with the oil port development to something that's happening in Koper or other places around the Mediterranean. And at the same time, and that also answers perhaps Andreas's next question, what's the interest of the Dutch? Well, I think there's an interest of the whole of Northern Europe, and depending on which topic they take on, whether it's urban planning or housing or transportation or water, where the Northern European countries are really interested in connecting to the Mediterranean. And that's also the reason why they fund it. And so there's sometimes it's the German ministry that pays, sometimes it's the Dutch, and so on. So they want to stay engaged, and that is maybe the moment to then switch over to this focus on port cities. So for me, the axis is about port cities as nodes for sustainable development, and there the idea of sustainable development again comes into the fore. But with this concept of using the Mediterranean as the starting point, so starting from water, that's also what this image tries to show, that it's not just about the port city itself as node, but that we need to start in the sea with the ships. As ships change in size, in fuel, in containers, whatever it is, they will shape and transform the ports shape the cities shape the hinterland, or the other way around. But that is a common theme for all of the Mediterranean. The Mediterranean has evolved this way. That's how many of the cities that are now heritage sites came into being. It was the heart of the Roman Empire, and that's the way we want to think it again. And that's important also for the Northern European states, cities, and ports. When you talk with people, for example, in the ports, there's lots of them who will say we need a shared agenda for European ports, north, south, west, east, to even counter what is happening with the Belt and Road Initiative, with the Chinese or the Russian transportation. So in that sense, many players in the EU understand that we need to think from the sea to the hinterland. And that is, for me, a function of planning. And then the port cities, or the port and the cities, play one role as a node in there. They're important, but they're at the heart of a larger scale development. And that's what I'm trying to capture with this. Also because there are a lot of disciplinary initiatives already. And when we presented this, we also got the question, yes, but why don't you just talk about mobility? Well, mobility itself is fine, but it's not the problem itself. It's the problem when the mobility and the logistics crosses the neighborhoods.
Yeah, it's
right?
not integrative if you only talk about mobility, isn't it?
Exactly. And so what we've been trying to do in this port city axis is also to identify actors and actor groups. So you see, there's a lot of activity now in ports trying to promote sustainability agendas. And I think sometimes they are more active and more focused than the cities, and they're more collaborative also because they have all these networks. So you see that there are groups of ports working together, even the Mediterranean cruise business, etc., etc. And then there's groups of cities working together. But the connection between what a port doesn't need and what the city next to it doesn't need, and what the value of the port is for the city and region next to it, that seems to me still to be the kind of missing link. So even if you think port cities and health, or port cities and regional development, port cities and heritage, so this focus of what does the port mean for the city region, so also the rural areas next to it. And I think that's where ideally we could come up with a spatial planning approach. And that doesn't necessarily mean the waterfront or the famous interface. I think this needs to be a much more networked approach. If you speak about the Netherlands, such an investigation needs to take into account Venlo, where the logistics from Rotterdam go, because Rotterdam is too expensive. So that's what we've also tried to capture with these dualities, because this obviously is such a complex topic that you need to break it down into more manageable elements. So these dualities are a way of trying to capture potential conflicts or urgencies that port and city need to deal with together. So the top left one, if you have industrial pollution and the city next to it, I think that's an obvious one. Or the trucks going through the neighborhoods, or huge cruise ships and the problem that that poses for heritage, where we see a lot of fake heritage being emerging, or other problems like the global shipping companies or global companies in general that put pressure on local initiatives in ways that are not, that the local municipality often can't deal with, or climate change, sea level rise. Those are questions, and we know that from the Netherlands, that port and city have to deal with together. I mean, we all know that if you want to be safe in Rotterdam, you need to go into the port because that area is much higher than the rest of it. So it's not as easy, but it needs to be a shared development of values in order to promote more insights into planning.
Thanks a lot. I think, well, of course, thanks a lot, Carola. I'm a bit mindful of the time. I don't know how much time we need. We have. Shall we address the questions?
Yes, there were quite a lot of them. So I will begin from the top. You've already answered some of them, I guess. So the first question was from Vil. Vil, would you like to ask a question and unmute yourself for that purpose?
Well, I'm Wil Zonneveld, Professor of Spatial Planning in the section which almost has the same name, Spatial Planning and Strategy. And of course, it's a fine introduction to my question, because in this section, and also in other contexts, the term spatial planning is bread and butter. And Roberto has used this quite extensively in his presentation, and Carola as well. But I'm just curious whether this plan has been used in this project. Mm-hmm. I'd assume that the terminology may have certain connotations which are not very productive in this setting. And one connotation is, spatial planning is about plans, and historically there's a kind of image that the plans implement themselves. So then you have to switch to another terminology. So I'm just curious how explicit spatial planning was used in the project so far, and if so, what the reception was.
I love this question because indeed it's a very central question in our activity. I will start with a little anecdote, and then I will give the complete answer. But when Remon and I, we had this preliminary meeting in which we were invited to give a presentation. Carola, she went on another day, so this time it was only me and Remon. Carola gave her presentation the next day in Brussels. You know, all the countries with their little names. Answering already Andrea's question, everything is in French, English, and Arabic with translation. I speak French, but the action plan was written in English. The first time Remon and I we went there and we started presenting, we had this message from the European Commission. They were all in a line at the bottom of the room, and they were nodding all the time. So every time, all the time, they were like, and I could almost hear them say yes. They are eager to work with spatial planning, with this concept, and I mean, the European Commission is very much aware. They understand what it is better than us, and they want to implement it. UFM is a little bit different. UFM is very concerned about the project, and they are still very focused on projects, and we are changing a little bit their culture, I think. But the whole point of the action plan is to explain, I think, to people with very, very different planning traditions, and for whom planning means very different things, that a set of separate but integrated actions may lead to a result that is integrative, sustainable, and more inclusive, right? So this idea that by coordinating spatial development, you can achieve some kind of meta-governance. I'm being a little bit, I'm careful with this, but I think it's true, is well received. Now, I'm not sure everybody understands what spatial planning is the same way, but they all kind of understand what the, I just want to sorry, I want to show something. So how, can you still see my screen or not?
Yeah.
Yeah,
sure.
Can you see? So this is an example of one round of discussion, right? In what happens is that everybody sends their comments. Their comments are analyzed one by one, and then they are answered one by one in the text. And through the comments, I could see that this one has one round has more than 330 comments. I could see that they come from very different perspectives. For example, a lot of governments are fascinated by the smart city, and they think that if they implement the smart city, all the problems will be solved. And then you have to convince them that's not true, right? And how did we do that in this in the action plan? We don't mention the smart city almost. We use other words to say the same things, but trying to convince them that technology doesn't solve everything. That you need coordination. And
perhaps Roberto.
Uh-huh.
I have also another kind of answer, Will, to your question, because when we first entered the discussion, we were asked to develop an action plan for an urban regeneration strategy. And we quite quickly said, well, perhaps the issue that we want to address is a little bit wider than just urban regeneration.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
It's about urban development. And of course, the people like that idea. And while discussing what we were meaning ourselves, actually, I think, Roberto, we came to the conclusion that the actions that we propose are actually criteria for good spatial planning. And I think this was a kind of message that was adopted by many and appreciated by many. So we are not, of course, in this action plan telling people how they should make a vision or how they should decide on where to put their money, but we do give them how many? 6 actions, right, Roberto? That when you're thinking about urban development and how to steer and influence that process, that you have to think about integrated approach, but you also have to think about enhancing knowledge development and capacity development. You have to think about monitoring the process and the projects and the vision as a whole. So all these ingredients, for me, was a kind of reminder. These are the elements of good spatial planning.
I like exactly, and I forgot about this particularity, that we went actually from a notion of urban regeneration to a notion of spatial planning. And we